In 1066, England found itself on the brink of a transformation unlike any it had ever seen. The clash of two powerful forces would not only decide the fate of a kingdom, but it would reshape the very fabric of society. But what led to this cataclysmic event? Why did the English throne become the prize of a brutal war that would change the course of history? Was it a battle for power? Or something more, something deeper, more personal? As the armies of King Harold II and Duke William of Normandy faced off on the fields of Hastings, the very soul of England hung in the balance. And the consequences of this single battle rippled through the centuries. What drove Harold to risk everything for his kingdom? What ambitions lurked behind William's claim to the throne? And who would emerge victorious in this fight that would forever alter the course of history? As you listen to the tale of the Battle of Hastings, remember, this was not just a struggle between two men, it was the collision of two worlds, two destinies. The age of Anglo-Saxon rule was coming to an end, and a new era was about to dawn. But in the end, what was it that truly tipped the scales? Was it the might of an army? Or was there something more at play? The answer lies in the bloodshed of Hastings, the spark that ignited the fire. What was it that made 1066 the year England's fate would change forever? How did a single event send the kingdom tumbling toward a confrontation of unparalleled significance? The year began with King Edward the Confessor, the reigning monarch of England, on his deathbed. Edward's passing, after a long and illness-ridden reign, would have a far-reaching effect. He left behind no direct heirs, and the throne was left to be claimed by those who believed they were entitled to it. At the center of this struggle were three men: Harold Godwinson, William of Normandy, and Harald Hardrada of Norway. Each had his own claim to the throne, each believed that the crown was rightfully his, and each was ready to fight for it. But it was Harold Godwinson who found himself first in line. Edward had allegedly promised him the throne on his deathbed, an agreement that Harold claimed was sealed with an oath. But Harold's claim was contested by William, the Duke of Normandy, who argued that Edward had actually promised the throne to him years earlier. To complicate matters further, Harald Hardrada, the Viking king of Norway, also laid claim, citing a treaty made between his predecessor and a previous English king. With the stage set for conflict, England stood on the edge of war. The struggle for the throne was not just about who would rule, it was about the survival of a kingdom. Who would emerge victorious from this chaos? And what price would England pay for its fractured leadership? As Harold prepared for the upcoming storm, little did he know, fate was already aligning against him. He would soon face an invasion from the south, a force unlike any he had ever faced before. The first blow, Harald Hardrada's invasion. Could Harold defend England on two fronts, or was he doomed from the start? Hardrada's invasion from the north threatened everything Harold had fought for. The moment Hardrada set sail for England, the fate of the kingdom shifted once again. Harald Hardrada's forces, numbering around 10,000 men, landed in northern England, hoping to seize the throne with a Viking invasion. They were met by King Harold Godwinson, who had just finished preparing for what was about to come from the south. Harold's army, fatigued from months of preparation, was forced to move quickly north to meet Hardrada's formidable Viking forces. The Battle of Stamford Bridge would soon unfold, and the English would experience their first test of the year. As Hardrada's Viking warriors lined up in battle, they believed victory was within their grasp. After all, the north had long been a Viking stronghold. But Harold's forces, bolstered by their determination to protect their kingdom, launched a fierce counterattack. The battle that ensued was nothing short of brutal. The Vikings, renowned for their fierce combat skills, were met with an equally brutal resistance from the English soldiers. After hours of bloody conflict, Harald Hardrada was slain, and the Viking threat was crushed. It was a hard-won victory for Harold, but it came at a great cost. Although Hardrada's forces were defeated, the price of this victory was steep. Harold's men, worn down from the battle and the swift march north, were left with little time to recover. And, just as they thought the worst was behind them, an even greater threat was looming on the horizon: Duke William of Normandy. The storm from the south, William's invasion. Could Harold survive the wrath of William of Normandy? The answer to that question would soon be determined on the battlefield of Hastings. The first signs of William's invasion came with a flicker of smoke on the southern horizon. William, Duke of Normandy, had long prepared for this moment. For years, he had worked tirelessly to gather support, rallying an army of thousands. His claim to the English throne was rooted in both ambition and a promise made to him by King Edward the Confessor years earlier. Unlike Hardrada, William's approach was methodical and deliberate. His fleet of over 700 ships carried an army that would soon descend upon the shores of England, and with it, the clash of two worlds would begin. Harold, fresh off his victory against Hardrada, now found himself facing the very force he had feared. The tension was palpable as William's army made landfall. The English, already stretched thin after months of battle, knew they were in for a fight. Harold, having left much of his army in the north, was forced to march south to meet this new threat. With each passing day, the English prepared for what would be their most critical battle. But William had more than just an army. He had a vision of conquest and glory that would make him more than just a duke. He would not simply fight for the throne, he would fight for a legacy. And as the two armies neared each other, it was clear. Only one would walk away with the crown. The battlefield, Hastings awaits. What would happen when the two great armies finally met on the soil of England? Could Harold's forces hold their ground against the might of William's invasion, or was defeat inevitable? The morning of October 14th, 1066, dawned clear and cold. The two armies stood on opposite sides of a hill, staring each other down, preparing for the battle that would decide the fate of England. The English forces, led by Harold Godwinson, were positioned on the higher ground, ready to defend their homeland. Harold's men, exhausted from their long march south, had only one thing in mind: to protect their king and their kingdom. On the other side of the field stood William of Normandy's army. Well-rested and eager for battle, William's forces were composed of a mix of knights, archers, and infantry. They were a well-trained and disciplined force, united by their shared vision of victory. And they had one significant advantage: strategic planning. As the armies squared off, the tension in the air was palpable. The clash of shields, the cries of soldiers, and the pounding of war horses' hooves filled the air. It was a moment of pure, unbridled chaos. But it was also the culmination of years of planning and ambition, a moment that would define the future of England. Harold's army, though fierce and determined, was already at a disadvantage. They were on the defensive, trying to hold their ground against an enemy that was constantly pressing forward. But it was not just the strength of William's army that posed a threat. It was their ability to adapt, to strike when least expected, and to use the terrain to their advantage. As the battle raged on, Harold's forces found themselves slowly being pushed back. The weight of their exhaustion began to show, and every inch of ground they lost seemed to slip them further away from victory. But Harold was not one to give up easily. With every wave of attack, he rallied his troops, urging them to hold fast. Could the English forces turn the tide of the battle, or would the Normans prove too much to handle? The feigned retreat, William's masterstroke. What was William's true strategy? Was he merely an invader, or a master of psychological warfare? As the battle continued into the afternoon, it seemed as though the English might still hold their ground. They fought valiantly, using their shield wall to resist the Norman attacks. But then, something unexpected happened. The Normans appeared to break their lines and begin retreating. It was a tactic known as the feigned retreat, and it would prove to be one of the most cunning moves in the history of warfare. Harold, seeing what seemed to be a retreat, saw an opportunity. He ordered his forces to chase down the seemingly fleeing enemy, hoping to deliver a final blow. But this was exactly what William had planned. As the English soldiers broke their formation and charged forward, they found themselves vulnerable to a new wave of Norman reinforcements. The Normans, having anticipated this move, quickly regrouped and turned the tide of the battle. As Harold's forces rushed forward, they were met with devastating counterattacks. William's cavalry, having been held in reserve, launched a furious assault on the now disorganized English army. The shield wall that had once been so formidable began to crumble. But it wasn't just the loss of soldiers that spelled doom for Harold. There was a far more personal blow coming. As the battle raged on, Harold found himself fighting alongside his brothers, defending the kingdom he had sworn to protect. But the weight of the battle, the injuries, and the mounting pressure began to take their toll. Harold's fall, the final blow. Would Harold's fate be sealed by the very battle he fought to protect his kingdom? Or could he find a way to turn the tide? As the battle intensified, Harold's personal fate became inextricably tied to the outcome of the fight. On the battlefield, he was not just a king, he was a warrior, fighting alongside his men, determined to give everything for his country. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. In the chaos of the battle, a well-aimed arrow found its mark. It struck Harold in the eye, piercing through his skull. The English king fell, his body crumpling to the ground as the battle around him raged on. The sight of Harold's fall spread quickly among his troops, and with it, the last vestige of hope for an English victory. Without their king, the English forces lost their cohesion. The shield wall, once their last line of defense, was shattered. What had been a valiant resistance now seemed like a lost cause. The Normans, sensing their victory, pressed harder, driving the English back with unrelenting force. But even in death, Harold's legacy would not be forgotten. His sacrifice on the battlefield, his determination to protect his kingdom, would echo through the ages. He might have fallen, but the spirit of England would live on. The aftermath, a kingdom in ruins. What happened to England after Harold's death? Was the nation doomed, or could it rise again from the ashes of defeat? The death of Harold marked the end of Anglo-Saxon rule in England. With their king slain and their army broken, the English forces were left in disarray. The Normans, under the leadership of William, stood victorious, their conquest complete. But what followed the battle was a transformation of an entire nation. As William made his way to London to claim the throne, England found itself in the hands of a foreign invader. The Norman Conquest would forever alter the landscape of England. William's victory was not just about seizing the throne, it was about reshaping the culture, the society, and the very foundation of England. The Anglo-Saxon elite were replaced by Norman nobility. Castles and fortifications began to rise across the landscape, a visible reminder of Norman power. The English language would be heavily influenced by Norman French, and the legal system would undergo significant changes. The feudal system, brought by the Normans, would replace the older Anglo-Saxon system of government. For the common people, life would become harder. As William solidified his rule, many Anglo-Saxons found themselves subjugated to the new Norman aristocracy. But even in this time of hardship, the English people began to adapt to the new reality. The nation might have been conquered, but it would not be broken. The crown and the cross, William's New England. How did William solidify his control over England? Was it through brute force, or did he use something more powerful to gain the loyalty of his new kingdom? William's conquest was not merely a military achievement, it was a political one. To secure his hold over England, William had to consolidate his power, both militarily and socially. One of the first acts he took was to commission the Domesday Book, a monumental survey of England's lands and resources. This would provide him with the information needed to distribute land to his loyal supporters and ensure his control over the kingdom. But William knew that power was not just about land, it was about hearts and minds. He strategically aligned himself with the church, gaining the support of the religious establishment, which was one of the most influential forces in medieval society. Through the church, William was able to present his rule as divinely ordained, further solidifying his control. As William settled into his new role as King of England, he also worked to maintain peace between the Normans and the Anglo-Saxons. While many Anglo-Saxons resisted the Norman presence, the reality was that the old ways were gone. The Normans were here to stay, and England was forever changed. The legacy of Hastings, a New England. What legacy did the Battle of Hastings leave behind? How would it shape England for generations to come? The Battle of Hastings, though a decisive victory for William, was only the beginning of a long process of transformation. The Norman Conquest had a lasting impact on England, one that would be felt for centuries. From the architecture of the castles to the way the English language would evolve, the influence of the Normans was undeniable. In the years following the battle, England would slowly become a more unified kingdom under the Norman kings. The feudal system, though harsh for the peasants, helped establish a more organized society. The legal systems, the language, and the culture all saw significant changes that would define the country for years to come. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of Hastings was the idea of monarchy itself. The English monarchy, though now under Norman rule, would continue to play a central role in the nation's identity. The battle that began with the clash of two men would ultimately lead to the creation of a new, stronger England. The end of an era, Hastings and the birth of a nation. Was the Norman Conquest truly the end of one era and the beginning of another? Or was it a continuation of a longer historical struggle? As William's reign settled into place, England found itself at the crossroads of two worlds. The Anglo-Saxon past, with its deep-rooted traditions, would never be fully erased, even by the might of the Normans. Instead, a new chapter in English history was written, one that blended the old and the new. In the centuries that followed, England would become a powerful kingdom, one that would later wield great influence over much of the world. The Battle of Hastings marked the end of one era, but it also set in motion the forces that would lead to the rise of a new and mighty nation. Conclusion: the Battle of Hastings, a decisive moment in the history of England, was more than just a military clash. It was the point of no return for a kingdom that would never be the same again. William's victory changed the very course of history, bringing an end to Anglo-Saxon rule and ushering in a new era of Norman dominance. Through strategic brilliance, political maneuvering, and the use of psychological warfare, William cemented his place as one of the most powerful rulers in history. But while he triumphed on the battlefield, the true legacy of Hastings lay in the lasting impact it had on English society. The feudal system, the dominance of the monarchy, and the fusion of Anglo-Saxon and Norman culture all stemmed from this monumental clash. The Battle of Hastings marked the beginning of a new chapter in English history, one defined by change, adaptation, and the struggle for power. Though Harold's death on that fateful day in 1066 was a loss for England, it was also the birth of a new England, one that would shape the future of the British Isles for generations to come.